This is Indian History Thali by Thali, where we ask archaeologists and historians how they know what they know about India's past. In this series, we will focus on Indian history through the lens of food.
Imagine you travel back in time to a city in the medieval Deccan. As you walked around its streets, you'd see markets bustling with people buying and selling all kinds of fruits, vegetables, grains, and meats, of course, but also pearls, diamonds, and maybe even horses. You would hear snatches of conversation in many languages, including Portuguese, Italian, and Russian. In the 1500s, Hampi, or Vijayanagar as it was called, was the capital of the Vijayanagar or Karnataka Empire, and it was one of the largest and richest cities in the world. To its north, Bidar, the capital of the Bahmani kingdom, was also famous for its wealth and its economic opportunities. Both these cities drew a steady stream of merchants, poets, scholars, and soldiers from around the world. Do we see the impact of such cultural interactions on the diet? And how do we know what people ate? In this episode, we speak to an archaeologist and a historian about food in the medieval Deccan. Not just what royalty and the rich ate, but also what common people ate. Let's look first at the kinds of evidence scholars work with when studying the medieval Deccan and its food habits. We begin with something rather unique, which you can look for the next time you're in Hampi.
I think one of the most fascinating, one can't call it an object because it's carved in situ, is what you find at Hampi is those long granite slabs onto which plates and bowls are carved. So that a lot of people probably did eat there together at the same time, and they were served foods not in a very different way than what we might imagine a thali to be. One big plate and a number of small bowls around for condiments and other things. And to have it carved in granite, which you can just then wash off and have a next bunch of people seated, is fascinating. I don't think you have this kind of dining table with uh, dining trays carved into stone on this scale anywhere else in the world.
Archaeologists analyze materials and data from excavations, including pottery. How does an archaeologist know if a 500-year-old pot was used to cook sambar?
So restricted vessels are basically narrow-necked with a wider body compared to the neck and the opening orifice as such, whereas an unrestricted vessel has a mouth or an opening which is wider than the rest of the body. And we do have a lot of unrestricted vessels which seem to have had a kind of a slip and a polish on the exterior surface, while it was not slipped or polished on the interior surface, implying to us that what might have been held in them inside would perhaps have been some kind of dry foods or something. If the polish and the slipping, that is a watery clay slip has been added by the potter while manufacturing it, is also on the inside of the vessel, we could say that it might have held some kind of a liquid. And of course, some of these studies have been corroborated with more technical follow-up studies of residue analysis, where either starch or some kind of proteins have been found. And if it is proteins like, dal, like tur dal, for example, is native to Karnataka and southern India. So it's pigeon pea, essentially. And if you have tur dal like that, then and if it is a kind of a slipped kind of a surface on the interior, you could reasonably hypothesize that perhaps a liquid like a sambar or some kind of a curry might have gone into the preparation of it.
Inscriptions and textual sources like the Manasolasa, which we heard about in a previous episode, are important sources to understand the medieval period.
Inscriptions mention things in passing, particularly with temple grants in terms of what kind of grain might be allocated to a temple, or sometimes, what kinds of feasts might be served.
One item that is mentioned in many medieval inscriptions is pan.
There is again a social etiquette uh, and a social hierarchy associated with pan bearers, pan offerers, and so on, many of whom have titles of that kind. So there are these fashions which are adopted, some of them food related, which make you part of a much larger cosmopolitan world of kingship. These are practices that have to be emulated in order to show you've arrived on the world stage. The problem with textual sources or even inscriptional sources is that they're really going to represent the elite more than anybody else. And perhaps Hemant, therefore, can fill in for what texts or inscriptions cannot talk about.
From an archaeologist perspective, which is a longer term perspective, we do know that in Karnataka in particular and South India in general, agricultural cereal crops, for example, begin only around third to second millennium BC,
Mhm.
and that include some of the southern Indian origin kind of things like pigeon peas and some other kind of grams like horse gram, black gram, and things of that sort. Rice and wheat and millets, which are also, of course, heavily represented in the southern Indian diets in medieval and later medieval times, especially for rice, are actually entering southern Indian dietary regimes only later, perhaps around the Iron Age or a little later. And rice, of course, also is entering around in the elite context. And it's only in the maybe early medieval times that these large tank-based irrigation regimes, agricultural regimes that happen in the deep south of the peninsula start to see rice productions again as an elite commodity. And Kathy Morrison's research has shown us that only around the 16th century does rice consumption become quite widespread in southern India. But till then, millets, various kinds of millets, which were introduced also coming from East Africa, Madagascar, even, are kind of what we see as native species. Of course, lots of fruits, dry fruits, legumes, and other kinds of things.
An important source for the medieval Deccan are accounts by visitors from around the world who recorded what they saw, including the foods that people ate.
And you do have from this time several people describing various kinds of foods, particularly meats that are eaten at the court of Vijayanagar. So Abdul Razak, who visited the Vijayanagar court, uh, is very happy because he gets supplied with a couple of sheep and several fowl every day. But you also have Nunes, who gives a description saying the kings of Bisnagar, Vijayanagar, eat all kinds of things. They eat mutton, pork, venison, partridges, hares, quail, all kinds of birds, even sparrows and rats, cats and lizards, all of which are sold in the market of the city of Bisnagar. And of course, there are entire communities which are completely vegetarian, whether it be Jains or Brahmins. And there are references to this too.
The Deccan also attracted some people who were escaping persecution. One such person was Garcia de Orta, a Portuguese Jew who fled the Spanish Inquisition in the 1530s. He lived here for many years and was the personal physician of the Sultan of Ahmednagar. He wrote an extraordinary book about medicinal plants in India. Rather unusually, this text includes a perspective rarely heard in medieval Indian literature, a voice from the margins.
It's set up as a dialogue between two people, one of whom is talking about native plants and foods and describing the various kinds of ailments that can be cured by eating them or consuming them in some way. And the other one, shows European knowledge of medicine. And then these two people represent high knowledge of a kind. And then occasionally you have the voice of a servant girl who also chips in and keeps describing ways in which a much larger subaltern world uses various kinds of foods and medicines. And so, having these three voices, one of a girl who is also in some way marginalized, is quite something. And there you get a sense of the kinds of plants and the kinds of equivalences people are imagining between different plants at this time.
You know from earlier episodes how many foods came to the subcontinent along with the Portuguese. Did you know they also introduced an intoxicant, tobacco?
There are all kinds of indications that it is somewhere on the west coast of India that it first arrives. And water pipes or hookahs actually originate from North Karnataka. So you have very early examples of Bidri ware, uh, which is used for making hookahs. So, for example, there are pictures of Adil Shahi Sultans smoking hookahs, and it seems to become fashionable at the Mughal court later. I mean, but right from Akbar, uh, the Mughals are trying to make inroads into the Deccan to whatever capacity. And this would be one of the objects of elite consumption that they see and then would want to take back, along with some of the region's best poets and hopefully some foods.
So, inscriptions, pottery, paintings, objects, and accounts by visitors paint a picture of the medieval Deccan as a place of both continuity and change. New foods that arrived along with the Portuguese took their place alongside grains and different kinds of meats. Older practices like eating pan and new intoxicants like tobacco became important to establish cosmopolitan status. And as more tanks or water reservoirs were built for irrigation, more land was brought under paddy cultivation and rice eating became widespread. What else can we say about the everyday food habits of common people?
But we know a lot less because we have prioritized either inscriptional research or art historical kind of ways of looking and understanding daily lives of people. That the archaeological research of other kinds of material remains have not been focused upon to ask and answer some of these basic questions. So, flotation is the starting point to recover the data. So, that could be archaeobotanical data, archaeofaunal data, and so on and forth. But here's an archaeological practice in South Asia, which is very, very recent as standard practice in archaeological excavations. Even more standard is actually screening of the soil that comes out of the excavation. And even that was not standard practice in South Asia till about 15 years ago. So I think archaeologists in India have the expertise and the necessary methodological sort of know-how to recover the archaeological remains that would ask and answer such some of these questions. Unfortunately, we haven't yet got enough excavated remains to perform such an analysis. And it's time that archaeologists sort of collaborate and sort of bring to the table a lot more material remains to enrich this historical record.